Hi everyone, good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. We are just waiting for a few more people to join. Hopefully you can hear me and see me okay. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes for more people to join and then we will get started. Hi everyone, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about storytelling and impact today, and as you'll have seen when you signed up, the title of the webinar is Positive Stories, Stronger Brands, Happier Customers, and that's what we're going to be talking to you about today. We think these three things really summarize the power of purpose and impact in storytelling. So just quickly to introduce myself, my name's Ros Hunt. I'm a corporate affairs, communications and sustainability strategist, and I've been working in this field for over 2 decades. My background is leadership roles in big agencies and then in-house teams in big brands. So I've been working on storytelling for brands in different guises for quite a long time. And today, we're really going to explore how companies can use an underrated superpower to tell better, more engaging stories that we really think will resonate with their customers. So we've got a great panel today, but just before I introduce you to the other 2 speakers, just to reflect really on where we are at for brands at the beginning of 2025. We're very much in a world of more noise, less attention, more polarization, more politicization, and we know that audiences are kind of weary and a bit worn down. Short attention spans and skepticism and mistrust is really at an all-time high. So we know that brands, and a lot of you in the room will be working for brands who want to communicate in this environment, really are under pressure to kind of stand up, stand out, and have kind of fresh stories. So we think, and what we're going to talk to you about today, is that telling real, understandable, relevant stories of impact can really help cut through in this environment. And when done right, social and sustainability stories can become key to your brand. But there is there's a nuance that we're going to talk to you about today, and that is, this storytelling superpower for sustainability and purpose isn't about trying to educate people or preach to people. It's about keeping messages sort of positive, exciting, and really trying to chime in with the values that people have at their heart. So this is not a green marketing session. It's about using sustainability, impact, and purpose as a storytelling superpower. And on that note, we have two great speakers with superpowers of their own in this space. We're really happy that we've got Thomas Kolster here, who is a brand advertising and sustainability expert. Many of you will have heard of the 𝘎𝑜𝑰𝑑𝘷𝑒𝑗𝑑𝘷𝑒𝑟 and his book, Good Advertising. So we're really happy that he's here to talk to us today. And then alongside him, we have Ana Maria Alvarez, who is Marketing Director at Closing the Loop. And for those of you that don't know Closing the Loop, it is an incredible Dutch social enterprise that partners with big tech companies to deliver commercially valuable green solutions. So really great panel. We've got an hour. There is a chat function, which you'll all have seen. We would love it if you put questions in the chat on the way through. We'd very much welcome a kind of interactive conversation. On that front, we've got a couple of polls for you to participate in. So, we want to know what you think on the way through and get your contribution on this topic. So chime in, ask questions. We will begin just talking to Thomas in a little bit more detail, but we are going to hold around 10 minutes at the end for your questions. So, fire away and let us know what you think on the way through. So to begin with, really, Thomas, I sort of gave a little bit of my view of the state of the nation for brands today, but where do you think we are in terms of brand storytelling, particularly around topics like purpose and impact?
Yeah, it's an interesting time for sure. So thank you for setting that up, and thank you all for joining here today. I think in some ways it does mirror a little bit of my own journey in this space in some ways. I mean, you did mention the first book, Good Advertising, which came out in the early days of Purpose, so around 2012. So this was a time where it was much easier to cut through with these types of stories. I mean, when you had Unilever started a sustainable living plan. You had brands like Chipotle and Body Shop and others who had very single emissions that sort of looked at that Achilles heel of competitors and used that in their communication to drive some amazing stories. And that's always what I've been fascinated about. And I think you talked about the superpower. I mean, what's more interesting than good versus evil? This is like the territory of Star Wars, of the Odyssey, of Tolkien. And I think when we tell these stories well, it has an emotional impact. And we all know that what makes advertising and campaigns effective is emotions. I think where we are today, though, and I think you hinted at a little bit, and I think about 4 or 5 years ago, what we saw was a lot of people going into this space. It's almost like chasing purpose, like a Pokemon. And probably a lot of people forgot to ask themselves why we're actually doing this. And so today we're in a time where it's become a little bit harder. A lot of these topics have become more mainstream, and so what we will be seeing is obviously a bigger need for creativity, for reframing, but also fundamentally, I think where I feel from the first book to the second book was that in Good Advertising, it was almost like a moral thing. It's in the title, good. It was a moral impediment that this is right, other ways of doing this is wrong. And I think what I realized with the second book, The Hero Trap, was in fact that I built brands that was too good to be true. In many instances, suddenly there were so many heroes in the marketplace. You could not go down the supermarket aisle without every brand pitching itself as Greta Thunberg or Nelson Mandela, which was not a very believable proposition. So with the Hero Trap, which is, I think, what you also hinted at a little bit, I mean, how do we get closer to ordinary people's lives? I mean, we're in a cost of living crisis. We're in a time where a lot of people might not be afraid of global warming, but, some nukes or wars or other things hitting us. And so the way I reframe it is that I think we are on the way towards what would be a post-purpose market. So a market where you have to find your why in people's why. So actually becoming much more sort of mission aligned in that sense. And so I talk a lot about transformative brands and how the brands that really excel in this space look at how can we actually enable change? How can we make people healthier? How can we make them more climate conscious? And for me, that was the real BS test in the sense that there's so many brands out there that talk about change. If I can feel, hey, wait a moment, here's actually a brand that helped me live healthier. I mean, I just came off the stage at MadFest, Mad Science Festival today, and I invited a Dutch brand to the States, a challenge brand called 𝑘𝘕𝑒𝑑𝘷𝑒𝘬𝑟. The interesting thing is they're the breakfast cereal. They do breakfast cereals, but with zero sugar and high in fiber. And if you look at how many big brands have talked about sugar and fat, they've had the opportunity to cut their way for many years, yet they haven't done that. And then you have a brand like 𝘎𝑎𝑑𝘷𝑒𝘬𝑟 who can use that as a superpower and help us towards that transitioning. I have a little son. I don't want my son to grow up eating his first meal packed with sugars. So I think in that way, those brands who get this transformative difference really succeed in the marketplace. That was a very long rant, and I was trying to keep away from politics as much as humanly possible.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you.
For now.
And I think, yeah, well, let's come back to the politics bit, because I think there is a question about the politicization of purpose that will be worth touching on. But so you've mentioned a couple of the sort of pitfalls where brands, have kind of lost their way. And we wanted to focus at the beginning. We are going to get onto solutions and what works, but what are some of the worst habits you see, and where do brands go wrong when they're doing this? What are the biggest errors that people make? I think there has become a bit of a sense of purpose washing being a thing. So what are the most egregious errors that people are making?
I think one of the key things is, that I touch on the hero trap as well, is really just stop pretending like your brand is some sort of world-saving hero. It's sort of a classic Patagonia mistake in some ways. Like Patagonia can get away with it, but 99% of brands can't. So I think it's really getting much closer to what matters in people's lives. And the second thing is, why are we treating this as some sort of discipline that is different from any other type of advertising and storytelling? We know that price, quality, and convenience drives the market. It's the very same thing in sustainability. It's no different. So we just need to translate a lot of these messages into something that actually are triggers in the marketplace. But there are a lot of these things that go back to, we just talked about 𝘎𝑎𝑑𝘷𝑒𝘬𝑟, right? If you want to have a high quality breakfast cereal, yeah, maybe get one without sugar, maybe get one that's high in fiber. That's quality. And another thing I would say is a key mistake is that, and I do a lot of judging at awards, and a lot of this communication come across as a really boring corporate social responsibility report. X% of this, our goal in 2040, 2050 is this. I have to make a choice right now. I don't wait for 2030 or 2040. I usually do this little joke, which is basically that I like to break down these really complicated issues into human relationships, because brands is about relationship between human beings. But let's say I get home from today's webinar, I get home a little bit earlier, I take my partner, she's there with another man, I get very angry, and I'm like, honey, what are you doing? And she looks at me, sorry, Thomas, I'm very sorry about that. What I do promise you, though, I'll be a little bit less unfaithful up towards 2040. Most of us won't really, accept that. So I think there is this, we make these conversations very technical and very far from what we know works in advertising and storytelling, which is emotions. And why I absolutely love this space wholeheartedly is that I don't think we have anything more emotionally charged than the sustainability space. Great brands are built because people hate and love it. People burn their Nike shoes. We've had Harley Davidson fans go full on crazy with a full automatic rifle and shooting their Harley Davidsons to pieces because the COO of Harley Davidson decided to run some D&I courses. I mean, so if we're looking for a highway for emotional relevance, we got it, we on it. So yeah, so avoid the technicality, don't turn yourself into the hero, but turn people into the heroes. And I think the third point was, see, I can't remember the third point, but somebody did a note about that, I'm sure. We can come back to it.
That's brilliant. It's interesting, the just to touch briefly on the sort of political agenda and the politicization of purpose. What advice do you have for brands and businesses that want to build purpose and impact into their storytelling, but look at, you know, brands like Budweiser and those people who've really sort of fallen foul of the political turmoil that's happening all around us? What advice do you have for those brands?
I mean, I don't get why in the first place we made sustainability a polarizing thing. I always feel that there should be something that's there for everyone. I think we failed in many instances because we did make this into sort of a value-driven agenda, like we are better than you, vilifying farmers, pretending that we want a high horse. Obviously, that is going to turn some people off. I mean, I grew up on a small island surrounded by fishermen and farmers. I know these folks. So I do understand why a lot of people feel that they've been alienated by this agenda, which is absolutely terrible because the people who can benefit most from it are not necessarily the affluent, but those who need to make their money last longer. And that is one of the amazing things about thinking more sustainably, is that that is a little added benefit. You actually get your resources to last longer. So I think we need a bit of reframing there. Obviously, for big brands, I think one of the mistakes they did was that if you're a big brand, if you're like you mentioned Bud Light, if you're Bud Light, you're there for every American, right? So why make that into a thing that separates Americans? You need to talk to things that really unite Americans. So I think right now there's an opportunity for smaller challenger brands who have a very specific target group with very specific political values. There's a massive opportunity for, like in the US, a Trader Joe or others, to stand up and fight for what you believe in. I think for a lot of the bigger brands, obviously they need to tread a lot more carefully. So if you're a Disney, for example, how do you find a way of making things that are a bit more inclusive, a bit more open to all your diverse target groups? So I think that's a key mistake often being made in this space, is to make it about a value-driven, mission-driven effort rather than actually thinking about what are the value for ordinary folks out there. What are they nervous about, and how can you speak to that?
Yeah, and that sort of ties nicely into the sort of next section of our agenda, which is focusing a bit more on what works and some of your experience and tangible examples that you can give the audience of things that have and do work. And this idea that you talk about in the book of that, you know, the brands have to stop trying to be the hero and actually, you know, make the audience the hero of the work and the creative. And is there a particular example of that you can share, or some tips that you can give people listening of how to get into that mindset and how they work that within their business?
Yeah, I think first of all, in terms of storytelling, I think it is figuring out how do you tell a story that's not just about sustainability. I mean, I can give you a very concrete example around. I mean, in Denmark, we were one of the countries who buy the most amount of organic produce. Is that about saving the world, or what is that about? And so how do you reframe that? And one of the supermarket chains did an amazing piece of storytelling where basically they took a family who'd even eating conventional food. They tested them and found out that obviously their bodies are full with pesticides and insecticides. Then they gave them a 2-week period only on an organic diet. Obviously, that's the amazing thing about our body. All those toxins are out of our bodies. So suddenly they're telling a much bigger story about health and well-being and not about saving the planet. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing, which I've always been a big believer in, why do we still do these 30-second ads talking about how great our company is. I don't get it. Like if I at home, obviously my mom and dad would expect me to clean up my room. I wouldn't get a lot of credit for putting up a big banner and see, Mom and Dad, I cleaned up my own mess. And I think in so many ways, that's what a lot of brands do. Look at us, we cleaned up our own mess. I'm not going to applaud that. So I think there's one key question I often test the communication with is, what is the right time and place for people to act on this message? What's the right time and place for people to act on this message? And that's 99% of the time, not your big advertising budgets. That might be the small, amazing notches that you can do. And let me give you one good example from last year in Cannes and D&AD. It was an award winner that did well. A lot of companies talk about food waste. And often again, I kind of feel like it comes off as, hey, look at us, we're doing the responsible thing, we're cutting down on food waste, etc. But let's also be honest with ourselves that a lot of these topics, we as consumers, citizens, whatever, are not always very good at doing our part either. And so a supermarket chain does this amazing thing by adding these stickers on fruit and vegetables. So, for example, a banana, they would have this label that would say, if the banana is brown, actually don't throw it away. It's amazing to make ice cream out of it. Or I love to do pancakes out of it and mash them up, throw them in the frying pan, no oil needed. It's just super tasty. Or if it's too green, what can you then do with it? So like an educational thing. So again, for me, we need to come to the point where brands become much more helpers and help us live those lives that we know the majority of us wants to live. I mean, The Guardian was just out with a project recently called the 89 Project, where they actually asked people across the world if we were willing to spend money on fighting climate change. 89% of all the citizens on this planet said, hell yeah, we want to do that. We actually want to put money towards this thing. And the most interesting thing I found was that it was not privileged countries like my own Denmark that was leading. It was a lot of the countries in global south, a lot of the people who have the least, who was actually most willing to spend, which I think is quite eye-opening as well. Obviously, part of that reason might be that they're also, unfortunately, also seeing most of the damage. Let's be real about that as well.
And how do you think, what advice would you give people who are trying to kind of articulate the argument for incorporating impact and purpose into their brand storytelling internally? How do they make the case for it?
I think, we've used stick for too long. Stick is not going to inspire anybody in an organization, and especially not marketing teams. We need more carrot. And it works. That's the thing. If you tell these stories and you tell them well, they are your little emotional superhighways. We did a study with Walk, which is effectiveness experts that look at the most effective advertising across the planet. We did a study with them that came out in May. We looked at a decade of the most effective campaigns globally, 100 most effective campaigns globally. Over that decade, 30% of those had a social or environmental component. And the reason for that is that advertising and effectiveness is driven by emotions. And so I think that the answer is pretty clear there. So I typically kind of try and show these types of facts to organizations, saying that this is just better storytelling. It's more interesting storytelling. Back to the Star Wars, if we don't have a villain, it's not a very interesting thing to watch. And so that's also why we need the reframing around who is actually the heroes of these narratives.
And do you think that we touched briefly earlier on language and the importance of language? Do you think that there is now some language that is kind of no longer going to be effective in communicating these kind of topics? Is there language that's now so politicized and so polarized that we have to kind of, marketers and communicators need to leave it to one side?
I think we should just all agree to have a swear bucket, and every time we mention the word sustainability, we put down £1 or €1, or Danish crown or whatever it might be. I think sometimes we're just too lazy to actually translate things into something meaningful. I think Paulus once said, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. We just don't do our groundwork well enough. I mean, a lot of these conversations, I mean, as you said, Ros, you've been in this business for many years. We've had these conversations many times before. It's not that we haven't talked about reframing before. Obviously, things like climate, things that are kind of feel far away, doesn't really move us. We know that it needs to be near and dear. It's the principle of journalism. It's the principles of good storytelling, and that's not changed in the sustainability field either. So we need to sort of think about how do we take these complex issues and bring them home to the dinner table, to things that people really want to talk about. And there's so many things that really truly matter. I mean, I can give you an example from my own life. My youngest niece, she plays football. She's 13. She's got elected to the national team. It's amazing. She get paid, I don't know, a 10th, a 20th of her male counterparts. Does that provoke my sense of fairness? It does, and that's emotional, and it's something that can get me up from the chair and want to discuss that and talk about that around the dinner table. And that's why these topics, if we do translate something like diversity, equity, and inclusion into something that just speaks to me, speaks to the regular guy on around the block who got kids. I mean, it's that simple. So I think we just forget, and that's also why I'm sometimes a little bit frustrated about all these conversations we keep having around greenwashing, about how to make sustainability relevant. We have the answers. I think now it's just time that we start acting on them.
Perfect. Thank you. Really interesting. We are going to just make sure that everybody's listening and not just eating their sandwiches in the background, and ask people to respond to a quick poll in a minute. But before we do that, I think just whilst we're bringing up the poll, maybe we'll just pose the poll question to you, Thomas, which is, what do you think the quickest way is to lose your audience if you're, building a creative campaign in this space? What's the hardest no?
One of the things I absolutely it's probably one of my little typical things that I hate, and it might happen at a conference, it might happen in a commercial, is when people start talking about global warming the first 5 to 10 seconds, like we've been living underneath a rock, like we don't know that global warming is happening. I think that's just an amazing turnoff in any. I mean, I even see the climate summits where somebody has the tenacity to go on stage and give a 5-minute introduction about that. I'm like, everybody in this room gets it. I tune out immediately when that's the sort of conversation started.
Yeah, I think we've all been there. So we all know that. We all know that feeling very well. So we've been running a quick poll in the background, I think, for some of you to say what do you think the quickest way to lose the audience is? And there's a bit of a spread of answers here. And I think what's interesting is it sort of plays to what you just said, Thomas, which is when somebody comes out on stage and in the first 2 minutes of their presentation, they've said the word impact or they've said the word sustainability, but not lent into the values that actually matter to people, then, you've already lost them in the first couple of minutes. So very good to see some of the numbers here shifting around, so we can see that there are a few issues that we're all aware of and we know we need to not stumble into.
Do you have a favorite, Ros?
I have a real aversion to a lot of the language, and I think the biggest challenge that all communicators in this topic face is that we use a language that naturally excludes a lot of people. So when my daughter started a new school last year, and one of the school mums on the school run asked me what I did, and the word net zero came into the conversation, and she didn't know what it was. And I think we have this assumption, we're all so familiar with the terminology that we think everybody else gets it, and they just don't. And so I think, Thomas, what you were saying about what's the super highway to the kind of shared human value that can bridge political divides, it can bridge geographies, it can bridge culture. That's what great creative is. And we need to stop kind of blocking other people out and find a way to bring them in?
I think it's sometimes education as well, right? That, I mean, we are storytellers by heart. Most of us used to get drawn into the industry, and I mean, for example, regeneration, which is another one of these. So everything had to be regenerative, and everybody sort of did a renaming of impact to regeneration. And I think we sometimes forget those stories behind it. I remember last summer, I think I was visiting a spirits producer up in Finland, and I was sitting next to this farmer who happened to be a woman, third generation, which was quite cool. So apparently her brother didn't want to pick up the farm, so she did, and rolled up her sleeves and went into regenerative farming. And the story she told me was that she was being bullied by her, the neighboring farms, because they didn't really understand this thing about regeneration. But then, as many places in Northern Europe, there was a drought last year, and the interesting thing was that her field was looking great, because obviously it stocks the water like a sponge. It keeps the water in there. And so for me, just a very, very tangible story about something that's just a better way of farming. You don't need to add the label regenerative to tell that amazing story about how that makes a better tasting vodka, because it's a higher quality product. The barley, obviously, that has well nutritioned barley would obviously get into that vodka as well. And I think we need to get back to that. So I very much agree, Ros, with the reframing of these narratives are just so incredibly important. But also, I think that now with the political climate, I think a lot of people just get too nervous and they shy away.
Yeah.
And I think that's a shame. I think you probably even see that more in the corporate communication space, in fact, actually, than you might see in your regular sort of advertising block on YouTube or wherever people watch ads these days.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Thomas. What we're going to do now for the next section of the agenda is, we've obviously heard a lot from you about what works and what doesn't work in telling sort of more impactful brand stories. And now we're actually going to go to a kind of real life case study with Ana from Closing the Loop. So we've heard a lot about why stories fall flat. We know that audiences are looking for something that feels a bit more real and relevant. And we know that particularly around topics like sustainability, potentially some things aren't working, and actually the risk is kind of being ignored. So we've got this great case study that Ana's going to talk to us about. Ana and her team at Closing the Loop work closely with Vodafone in Germany, and they approached this challenge in a new way, and they looked at a way of building purpose and impact into brand storytelling through a program called 1for1. So Ana, if I can come over to you, and maybe you could just tell us a bit more about the campaign and the backstory to 1for1 and what it's all about.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ros. I think it's very nice to hear everything, how you guys set the scene, and to be able to then come with this example where I think hits quite some high notes of what we've been discussing. Let me very briefly explain to you what we do, because we're not a marketing agency, we're not a PR agency, we are a social enterprise based in the Netherlands, and we help tech brands add a green credential to their existing offer. On one hand, we help them without changing the purchase experience, so that it's still very easy for the consumer or customer to purchase their devices, but we do enhance the proposition because for many, green credentials are becoming more and more important. And we do this with one very simple service, simple but powerful, called 1for1. For every new device sold by our customers, we collect and recycle an equal amount of electronic waste. And we collect this waste from countries where that waste would normally not be collected. So then you can think of the global south, right? Africa, but there's also Southeast Asia. There's enough waste problems in all kinds of waste streams. We focus on electronic waste. And what is so interesting about the story is that although the core of what we do doesn't scream marketing, thanks to our partners in Vodafone Germany, it has proven to be very powerful marketing, because they took our story, they implemented 1for1. They've been doing it since about 2 years. We just passed the 2.7 million collection milestone. That means we have collected 2.7 million broken phones for them and recycled them, which is, well, rather a great milestone to have. And their promise is for every direct customer that buys a new phone with them through their direct channels, we collect an equal amount of broken phones in Ghana and in Nigeria. At the beginning of the journey, they saw potential, and we had some really nice PR releases that caught some attention. But then as we started having more milestones that were also impact related milestones, where we started helping them understand the impact it had in the local communities with the people that collects the phones for them, we created a very nice PR campaign around a documentary where we brought our client, of course, Vodafone Germany, but also an influencer, a rapper called 𝘎𝑎𝑑𝘷𝑒𝘳𝑒 from Germany, and we did a small 7-minute documentary and a whole campaign around that. And what stands out of this effort is the connection and the simplicity to that one moment of purchase. We didn't went into promising a world without e-waste, or we didn't went into saying Vodafone is the best you can ever have. I don't think even Vodafone was mentioned a lot throughout the campaign, and they gave the light to the people that made it possible, and that is our collectors in Ghana, our local partners in Accra, how the whole journey continues. And because it's a journey, it gives for more stories, right? So at 1.5 million, the campaign happened. It went really well. We got some very nice communication marketing awards that you normally don't see these type of campaigns get. So it also shows there is appetite for this called sort of innovative storylines that you don't expect from an operator. But next to that, it's the gift that keeps giving. You know, the next milestone, we can also talk about what happens to the recycling. The next milestone, we can talk about a little bit more in depth about the lives we touch in the countries where we collect. And at the same time, they use it next to their other initiatives, because they have many other initiatives about extending life of your phone or repairing your phone. They also use this to educate their target audience, and pairing it to that moment of happiness when you're getting a new device. You got the device you want, how you want it, in the service you want it, at the price that sort of fits what you need. And on top of that, you got 1 for 1. So I think that made it it is still a very straightforward, no long-term, let's say, proposition that has been very fun to work with, but also very nice to see being lifted off the ground.
Thanks for that, Anna. Thanks. It's good to hear the overview of the campaign. How important do you think the choice of influencer is in the campaign? So I know you chose not to really work with a sustainability person so much as a broader talent, if you like. And how important do you think that is to sort of the overall success of the campaign, using different voices and a sort of wider influence pool?
I think it brought the third perspective. You have the brand, which is a big brand, which falls into maybe people being tired of listening to big brands. I cannot say if that's the case for them, but I'm just putting them in the bucket of big brand. You have the social enterprise, which in many ways we don't yet have a voice. And then you have the influencer, in this case, 𝘎𝑎𝑑𝘷𝑒𝘳𝑒, that indeed he's not specifically talking about sustainability, but he was interested in testing what that would be. And to be honest, I don't think anybody else but someone like him could have done a better job in showing a very real documentary. So it didn't feel fake. And you see him sweating in the 35 degrees landfills that we went to. And so I think it did bring a bit that reality and that connection to you, and not to the world and the business people, but literally to you. So that really added like that extra secret ingredient to the recipe.
And do you think that part of the success of the campaign was that you working together with Vodafone didn't see it really as an environmental campaign or an environmental PR campaign, but as a kind of integral part of people's relationship with this precious thing that we all carry around in our pockets and looking at all the time. How important was it that you didn't go into it as an environmental marketing campaign?
Oh, that's a wonderful question, because I think it makes a big difference. What we do is not the end goal of everything. What we do at Closing the Loop. So it's a first step to something. And they see that. They see that as a first step to education, as a first step to connection, and then bring on maybe the bigger changes that they probably will be doing. So for us, working closely with them and helping them see that the connection should not be purely and only about sustainability was a big part of the work we did at the beginning, because it's the logical route to take. And the other thing is, it's a story that evolves. So whatever we thought it would be on day one when we worked on the first ever PR press release is a very different mindset when you bring to them the number of 1.5 million, the testimonials of the people that collected for them. And that also helped them see the connection and a bigger connection to their consumer as well, the human angle of it. So I think that this has made the whole difference. It has really made the whole difference that it has remained very simple, very, very simple. No big promises and no big request from the consumers either, because unfortunately, and I really say that, people say they want to, but they don't do it, right? You still want the best and the greatest. And this is me now personally speaking, maybe not on behalf of Closing the Loop. I don't think people will stop buying anytime soon. So expecting that that's going to be the message is just another message around blaming and shaming. And it's, people still want the greatest and the latest and the best. So let's see how we can turn that into a trigger for more. And I think Vodafone has seen that as well.
And it sounds like this campaign is a really good example of what Thomas was talking about earlier, which is the brand kind of being by your side as a consumer on the journey and almost taking action on your behalf. So by, as people upgrade their phones or get a new phone, ultimately 1for1 means they can do that without having to feel guilty about it or to feel anxiety about it, because actually the action's kind of been taken on their behalf. So I think that, it feels like it connects very much to what Thomas was saying earlier.
And it also triggers, right? Triggers to maybe investigate more, triggers to indeed consider refurbish, it triggers to other options, other ideas. So I think it's a very simple seed to plant, because it's not a painful seed. And there's many ways of doing what we do, but we found that, and I think I'll say that 1,000 times more, simplicity has been such an important part of everything with Vodafone, with any of our customers, because who wakes up thinking today I'm gonna end electronic waste problem? Very few. We do, but not many more. So how to help them see it and put it in very simple terms so that other understands, especially after the CO2 madness. I still don't understand it, right? So we need to make sustainability relatable, understandable, and we need to see the value that it has to bring a surprise factor in your brand stories and bring it at the core. Because if it continues to be a parallel avenue, well, it will continue to drive further away. So
Got it. Okay, that's great. Thank you, Anna. So just before we bring Thomas back in, just to kind of wrap up on the 1for1 campaign, because I think it's such a useful case study for all of us who are working in this space. If you could say the 2 or 3 key success factors, we've obviously talked about simplicity a bit, but what were the couple of other things that you would say were really intrinsic to making it work?
I think the direct connection with our consumer action.
Yeah.
So an action releases a trigger. and it's a very simple connection. So again, simplicity. And I think in terms of more on the creation part, we did work a lot together, closely together. We, on our side, have the knowledge of the story that we can help them tell. Their core is not to tell our story or this type of stories, but that is our day-to-day. So we found each other in very good position to help each other out. And they had the power to amplify it, and they had the power to make the documentary, which made the whole difference. So I think the collaboration between two partnerships between innovators, small companies, big companies, and bringing that story together was definitely also a big success factor of it, and continues to be, because we continue to work together to the next milestone and the next piece that we want to bring out this year, for example.
And Anna, what do you think are the barriers that are stopping companies exploring these kind of partnerships with startups and scale-ups that are doing really interesting things, and how might those barriers be overcome?
I think as long as it doesn't make business sense, as long as the offer that companies like where I work don't bring a very logical advantage beyond the green, is very difficult to make business. And I think that's the reality for many. I think as long as the marketeers, brand managers, PR, all the people that are in the creative angle of how to tell stories don't see the huge potential that impact stories have, and don't connect it to the core of their storytelling, then it will continue to be an alienated topic. And that makes it very difficult for companies like mine to connect with them, because but we already have a promise and a brand, and we don't talk about this and we don't talk about that. So it takes time to understand and see the potential, but that's I think one of the biggest challenges that we accept to have, and that we try to have when we talk to clients. We will never be part of their core story, because they sell electronics, not what we do. But we definitely think, and that applies to any other social enterprise or type of company like ours, but finding the way to treat it as a business, to treat it as another great specification that can enhance your offer, makes the difference.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's really interesting about the one-for-one story, is the way it's kind of an intrinsic value of the phone, in a way that, your phone has so many other intrinsic benefits. Making one-for-one a part of that instead of a kind of green add-on is a really great kind of storytelling mechanic, essentially. So if we bring Thomas back in now, what would be great to do, because we want to make sure we've got time for a few questions at the end, and we are running out of time. It will be great just to hear from both of you in terms of, for the people in the room today and who've listened to some of the insight and experience that you both have, what's the one message you want them to take away from today? So if they were to go, when they go back to the office later or tomorrow, and are back at the desk thinking, I want to try and find a different way to build impact or purpose into my storytelling, what's your top piece of advice? Thomas, maybe we'll come to you first.
Yeah, and first up, congratulations, and closing the loop in the 2.7 million phones collected. I think that's a huge achievement. I've been in that crowd, and I've seen the garbage around the city just in general. So I think it's really a worthwhile endeavor, and also as you said, Ros, I mean, it's when it's the right time and place to do it, exactly when people need a new phone, right? And we talk about convenience, you're relieving people of feeling guilt around buying potentially new handsets. I think a very, very good message there. I think one of my key messages is that we can keep talking about this for a very, very long time. By the end of the day, marketing, advertising, all of these things are driven by bravery, about wanting to stand out, taking a chance. That's really what sort of drives brands forward, because you differentiate, you tell more exciting stories. So I'll probably go with the sort of more human aspect of all of this. I think we just need to sometimes stick to our guts and be brave enough to do these things. It's easier said than done, but typically what I advise clients to do is to say that most, if you just set a small fragment of your marketing budget aside, typically you would anyway set some aside, 3 to 5% for something a little bit quirky, fun, whatever. Why not align that with projects like Ana's? Use those 3 to 5% as a way of betting on something that might pay off really, really well. And I've seen that so many times. MasterCard is a brilliant example of that have done campaigns that really resonated around refugees in Poland coming in from Ukraine. They did an amazing stunt there that's now being adopted by the Polish government as a way of creating more work, not just for refugees, but for Polish people in rural areas in general. So I think be bold. I think if you're not bold, you might as well just go work in a bank rather than advertising.
Brilliant. I love that. Thank you very much, Thomas. Ana, what about you? What would be the one piece of advice that you could give people listening today, having been in the thick of a campaign recently that's really worked?
Is it too bad to say again, keep it simple? No, I think the connection should just be very clear to whoever your target audience is. And I know that's what we learn in marketing in the first day of school, let's say, but it's not always there. Just make sure that if your mom can understand it, if your brother can understand it, then the world can understand it, and make sure it connects to a value that they recognize, a value that people actually see as important. So that's something that I really see happening with what we do, because again, maybe they're not looking for it, but when it happens, they realize that it does add up to that green need that they maybe have. And yeah, give it a chance to impact stories, right? Ours, any, just think how they can be core of your brand in a as good as when you sell, like in my past life, an air fryer. Just keep it, make it sure that it resonates and it's part of the brand and the product since the beginning, not at the end like a sprinkle. So it's really that. I can never just give one. But
no, that's great. I love that. And I think one of the things with creative people and people who work in communications and advertising is that we also kind of love our own brilliance. And sometimes we overcomplicate things because we're trying so hard to be brilliant that we forget actually simplicity is sometimes the most brilliant thing. So I think that's great. Thanks, Ana. We have had a second poll kind of running in the background, just to hear from the people on the call, on the audience, about really what makes a purpose story stick with you. And I think going back to the 1-for-1 example, what's interesting is how well real voices perform. So, hearing from some of the people collecting phones on the ground in Africa is obviously really, really important to the 1-for-1 campaign. And that polls highly in the audience poll today. And then this idea of simplicity and that sort of fast track to emotion also comes across really strongly. So as a group on the webinar today, we're all actually really aligned on what good looks like. And I think that's, a helpful thing for people to take away today. We've got about 5 minutes left. So if you have got a burning question for Thomas or for Ana, please do pop it into the chat. And we can pass that on to them and we can answer those questions. One that we have had in already is really about how anxious should we all be about greenwashing. So a lot of people who work in big corporates are used to having legal teams poring over everything. Sometimes that kills the creativity of where the advertising and marketing people would want to go. Obviously, there's shifting sands in terms of regulation at the moment, particularly in Europe. But have you got advice for people about who are maybe worried about falling between greenwashing and green hushing? Thomas, what do you think people should be aware of?
Again, I think we've had a greenwashing conversation before. I think it's probably the third time that it reemerges as a topic in my professional career, and I think we tend to pretend that it's the first time we ever heard about greenwashing. Like I said before, advertising marketing is dealing with risks, right? I don't ever recommend anybody to oversell the little that they're doing. That's never been helpful for anyone in advertising, so why would we do that? But I think in this day and age, I think we spend too much time discussing greenwashing rather than actually focusing on the other side of the coin, which is what actually drives brand growth, engagement, etc. People really want to hear from big brands how they can help them live better, more climate friendly. We are living in very uncertain times, and what I've seen earlier and what history have taught us is in uncertain times, people tend to go and trust big brands. They trust in institutions, typically go up as well. So I think there's a real opportunity here for big brands to play a key role, and that is not by fearing the stick, but actually looking for the carrot. What's the added value that we can gain in these uncertain times?
Thanks, Thomas. Really helpful. Anna, have you got a perspective on this one?
Well, I think greenwashing, unfortunately, has made it that we don't talk about it at all, right? Because you want to be, out of trouble as soon as possible, and the easiest way to be out of trouble is by not talking, and that makes the conversation quiet. So, I think we need to dare to start talking about it, and of course, do the homework and choose the right wording and make sure that it's backed up and all of that. But I having worked with legal teams that were heavy on the claims we used to do back in corporate life, I think we also have a little bit of a responsibility to push them through, to do our homework properly, but push them through, because otherwise, the moment greenwashing started happening, it immediately created a wall where no one wanted to talk about it, which is the easiest thing to do. But if we don't talk about it, then it also doesn't go. So I think now is a good time to start pushing, also because the world is upside down. So maybe it's a good time to test again and push it through.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting, sort of plays back to what Thomas said earlier, which is perhaps the one thing brands need to remember is, even with all the kind of political noise swirling around, those polls do consistently show really, really high percentage of people concerned about the topic. And so actually the issue is not that people don't care about this topic, it's that we're not talking to them about it in the right way that engages with their values. And that just brings me on to just the last question that we've had in from the floor, which is, have you seen a shift in how receptive consumers are to green storytelling in the last few years? Are they more or less receptive? It's a question for the floor. And I think that's an interesting one, because actually what we've been trying to do in this session perhaps is say, maybe green storytelling is the problem rather than the solution. But Thomas, maybe if I pose that one to you, do you think there's been a shift in how receptive consumers are to this kind of storytelling in the last couple of years?
We definitely see massive regional differences for sure. Without doubt, if you go more Northern Europe, consumers are highly educated in these topics. There's no doubt that technology like AI will make it even easier for consumers to search out new, greener, healthier solutions. So I think there is a very aware target audience there. And for the brands who start to zigzag in these political uncertain times, will definitely lose the love that they've earned there. What I find especially interesting is that now also in emerging markets, this is becoming or being on the rise as well. Back to the Guardian survey, but even and I think we need to remind ourselves of this as well, like green is just not one static thing in time. In my first book, advertising, I had a campaign from Hyundai that won a Grand Prix in Cannes that was widely recognized as best practice. If I look at that today, it's greenwashing. When we look to emerging markets and we ask people there, what are some of the green brands, you will be shocked to see that, for example, one of the world's biggest oil companies, Aramco, is on that list because they communicate around green efforts. So, green is there. I mean, with a heating planet, with what we're seeing right now, with more and more people facing the consequences of this stuff, of course it's on the rise, and it's becoming more and more popular in the media space, etc. We have a political reality, and that's why you should never look to politicians. We have a political reality that is not aligned with the average citizen at the moment, not even in the US. So we should not be distracted. I think that's part of the political agenda in the US, is to distract us from the real issues here. And, as long as a time machine is not invented, we cannot go back to a time where fossil fuels are cheaper than renewable. We cannot go back to a time where, unfortunately, white old men like me are on the top. Luckily, we are in a time where it's much more diverse, much more exciting. We need to keep pushing.
Yeah.
It's on the rise.
I love that. And I think that's a really great summary of how all of these different topics kind of intersect. Impact isn't just about environment. It isn't just about social impact. We're talking about, sort of multifaceted positive impact that we're all trying to get to. So I think that's a great point to kind of close the conversation. What a fascinating conversation. And I really hope that the people on the webinar have really taken away some insights, both from Thomas's obviously long and varied experience, and from Anna's really recent example of a great effective campaign in this space. And thank you for playing along and voting on the polls and sharing your comments with us. And we wish you a really good afternoon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Ros.
Bye.
Bye.